Episode 57 of Red versus Blue. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
And here's the deal. Here's how you become a hero. You create a problem, and then you solve the problem. And then you become a hero solving the problem you created, right?
Well, that's certainly a strategy, and it's a strategy that a lot of MAGA world believes was fully implemented today, and we saw the brilliance of the great negotiator in action. Because as we're speaking, the stock market is up about 3,000 points on the day. It turned on a dime when it became clear that Trump was going to pause for 90 days the tariffs on everybody except China. So they're sort of celebrating his great and brilliant leadership. Now, I will simply say to that, the way it looks to me is that Mr. Market kicked the great negotiator in the butt, and he went across town. I recall the great quote from James Carville back in the Clinton administration when he said, "When I come back in reincarnation, I want to come back as the bond market because everybody cares what they think." And that's what happened here.
Yeah.
Bonds that were at 4%, 10-year Treasury bonds at 4% at the beginning of the week, hit 440 on Wednesday. The Treasury Secretary went in and said, people are dumping bonds. We can't finance the government. We need to make this stop. And so they very abruptly abandoned this no negotiation. We're in it for the long-term strategy that Howard Lutnick was articulating on the Sunday TV shows, and stopped on a dime in terms of these tariffs across the world, except for China. The result being that the markets reacted by saying, thank God this nonsense is done for a while.
Right.
The markets have surged. They're surging. They will surge around the world beginning tomorrow. We had more extensive wealth destruction since last week. More was in the offing had these tariffs continued. They have doubled down with China. China is now subject to 125% tariff on all the things we make from China, which include iPhones and a lot of electronic equipment, televisions and the like. Tariffs on American goods going to China have increased from 34 to 84%. So we're going to sell a lot less in China. What happened this week is that Trump, between his various golf outings and sports teams visiting the White House and other things, spoke with enough American executives, including Bill Ackman, Ken Griffin, Ken Langone, Jamie Dimon, Ray Dalio, people who have funded his campaigns and his efforts over the years, telling him to knock this crap off. And finally, he relented and capitulated. Stellantis, by the way, the new Chrysler, announced they were laying off 900 people. The effect in Michigan was beginning to be broad and deep because auto parts come from Mexico and Canada. So the economy was really facing the odds of a recession. It remains to be seen if that risk is now over with. I suspect it's not over with yet. There's more to see. So that's what happened on the tariff front this week. And, of course, the Democrats were trapped by their own rhetoric. They can't oppose the tariffs when you also support the tariffs. And rather than saying hell no to tariffs, they were saying yes, but. And that was a losing hand for them. So they sort of lost the ability to exploit this issue the way they should.
2 points. Even though things are coming back, the markets are coming back, the world markets are coming back as well, there's been some damage done, some permanent damage to our relationships with all of these other countries, hasn't there been?
Serious damage. For example, Japan and South Korea are now working out how they can work better with China to insulate themselves from American unpredictability. China has a big new opening now to the rest of the world that doesn't see the United States as a reliable trading partner. Same thing is true with Europe, who will now see more opportunity to diversify their exposure to China and other markets away from the United States. This is going to be a long-term hit. It will certainly be a long-term, probably generational hit to the credibility and trust America had built up with its trading partners. It has long-term implications for cities with ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach going forward. Here's just one example. One Trump policy that looked like it might be a winner was that BlackRock was going to take over the operation of the ports on either end of the Panama Canal that were managed by a Hong Kong company. China was sort of opposed to that. It wasn't clear they were going to block it. Now it looks like China will block that. And so what could have been a win for the Trump administration is now bollocksed up in his trade policy with China, which continues to be. I mean, China's a huge market. for both American goods and for goods coming into America, and for agricultural goods, by the way, which a lot of which go to China. That problem is yet to be fixed.
So would it have been a better strategy in the beginning to place the focus of these tariffs strictly on China and team with the allies in that battle? Would that have been a better strategy?
Yes. Probably sitting down and negotiating with people before we put them on would have been a better strategy. Probably just about any other way you could have handled this would have been a better strategy.
So I could have been president, is what you said.
Last week, anybody could do it.
Okay. Anything else we need to talk about on the tariffs? I guess we're still, in 90 days, this all comes to an end again, and we may see more of the same, right? And then he bails himself out and becomes a hero again.
Yes, in 90 days, we could be right back where we were today with a big trade mess. Hopefully, Trump and his team have learned the lesson when they see the market reaction to him backing off of this, and he'll stay back off because literally trillions of dollars of wealth were destroyed. So we will see what happens. Mr. Market is very convinced about where this ought to be and very convinced that he was wrong. And Mr. Market's not going to change his mind about it.
Now, a lot of this tariff situation has caused some tension within the Trump team, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, when you destroy $9 trillion, and if you go back to the inauguration day, $30 trillion of wealth in the country, there are a lot of people in the administration who came out of the wealth industry who don't want to be blamed for it and are very anxious to make sure that the world knows, even if on background, who is actually responsible. So we saw Elon Musk call Peter Navarro a moron and then say that he's dumber than a sack of bricks. He came out later and apologized to Bricks for using that. And of course, most people think on this issue, at least, Musk is absolutely right. Peter Navarro is kind of like Matt Gaetz. He's very easy to hate. He ran for office 5 times in California as a Democrat in San Diego County. His Democratic campaign manager called him, and I quote, the biggest a-hole I've ever known. So there's no love lost in the White House for Peter Navarro, and people want to get on record making sure that they know that they're on the other side of Peter. Steve Bannon has long hated Musk, and a lot of people think the reason why Musk is piling on to Navarro is because Musk is either going to get pushed out or is going to leave the White House, and he wants to claim that it was done because he stood up to the bad trade policies of Navarro and Howard Lutnick. So that might give him opening for an exit strategy is the thinking. Trump himself is upset at Mike Waltz, and the long knives are sort of out for him. Laura Loomer got several of the NSA staffers fired this week. Kristi Noem and Metcalf, the CIA director, have blamed Hegseth for the entire SignalGate issue. So they want to make sure that their fingerprints are removed from that. You have a conflict going on between Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. Bessent won this week. My sources tell me that Bessent really was sort of not in the loop during the tariff discussions last week. He was sort of stayed at Treasury trying to work on taxes. But finally, he was the adult in the room that came in and said to the president, this is riling the Treasury market. We're going to have serious long-term damage. We need to reverse course. And that, of course, now advances him at the expense of Howard Lutnick. The other thing this has done is it's made the poll numbers begin to fall. And when poll numbers fall, you become, the Congress becomes more independent. One commentator said the 3 C's of political reality, constituents, courts, and Congress begin to have a leveling effect on the power of the executive going forward when you begin to lose. And as I've said before, Trump has squandered his political capital faster and for less gain than just about anybody in the history of the office.
And we also still have a budget bill in front of us, right?
We do. And this is where we're seeing the influence of Donald Trump wane as it relates to the Freedom Caucus members. They call themselves ultra-conservative. I don't think many of them are very conservative. Economically illiterate might be a better term. They are balking at cutting a deal because they don't believe the Senate has cut enough out of the budget. Now, there's still plenty of room to make budget cuts down the line because they set a floor, not a ceiling in terms of the cuts. But they're continuing to balk. There's maybe a dozen of them who are refusing to vote for a budget. If they don't pass a budget this week, they're going to go on vacation for 2 weeks. And all of these congressmen are going to hear in their districts how much people dislike cutting Social Security, cutting the national parks, cutting the health care administration, cutting Medicare, and Medicaid. And I think that's going to make it even more difficult for them to pass a budget with more cuts. The Senate wants large permanent tax cuts. The House is willing to raise taxes, the House Republicans, on people making, pick a number, $750,000, $1 million or more. Here's the big question. You know, when I was a candidate, Mike, the Grover Norquist no tax pledge came out, and every Republican candidate across the country, no matter what office you were running for, was asked to sign the tax pledge saying you're not going to vote for a tax increase. Given the nature of not only the tariffs, but House Republicans wanting to raise taxes on millionaires, we'll see how many people remember that and whether Norquist and the tax pledge have the same stroke that they did just a few months ago with the Republican candidates. Trump, of course, governs by fear. And the real question for him is what happens when people cease to fear you? And because he squandered so much of his political capital on tariffs and on some of these other issues, some of these Freedom Caucus people just don't fear him anymore.
Yeah. And a guy like Rand Paul, who's been a real supporter of Trump all through this whole thing, through the first term and everything, he was really outspoken recently as well. So.
Yeah, well, you know that the situation is crazy in Washington when I have to say that I think Rand Paul was right because I don't agree with him on the time of day.
Right.
But he has been right on this.
All right. The last thing we want to cover, and as you and I discussed before we went on the air today, this story would have been huge had it not been for the tariff thing and various other things. But the SignalGate thing has been pushed off into the corner, and nobody's even talking about it anymore, except you are.
Well, I thought our listeners would welcome a postscript about how did Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number actually get into Mike Waltz's telephone.
Yeah,
there appears to be an answer to that. It was researched by The Guardian and reported by The Guardian newspaper, a liberal newspaper based in England, I believe. And here is what they say. According to 3 people briefed on the internal investigation, Goldberg, this is back during the political campaign before Trump's president, Goldberg emailed the campaign about a story criticizing Trump for his attitudes towards wounded service members. To push back against the story, the campaign enlisted the help of Waltz, who was then a congressman, their national security surrogate. Goldberg's email was then forwarded to then Trump spokesman Brian Hughes, who copied and pasted the content of the email, including the signature block with Goldberg's phone number, into a text message that he sent to Waltz so that he could be briefed on the forthcoming story. Waltz ultimately did not call Goldberg, the people said, but in an extraordinary twist, inadvertently ended up saving Goldberg's number in his iPhone under the contact card for Hughes, now the spokesman for the National Security Council. So he was trying to put Hughes on the call, but put Goldberg on the wrong number. Now, I had a situation recently. I was emailing myself a note to not forget, and an email came up with my name on it that was from some fraudster in Serbia who's trying to get into my accounts. And, Suri asked me if I wanted to email this guy.
Right.
So it happens. Now, I'm not a dumb guy, but I'm not the president's national security advisor either. But I figured out not to do that. The guy who is the president's national security advisor did not.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of speaks to the whole competency question. As I've said many times, Trump is going to rue the day that he appointed an incompetent, mediocre yes-man counsel. And SignalGate and the tariffs and sending the wrong guy to El Salvador, those aren't the last of the major crises that are going to result from poor leadership. But that's, to our listeners out there, that's apparently how the story happened.
That's a great story, and I have not heard that anywhere else but right here. So that's fantastic. Well, just keep in mind, and I just did the math, as of this taping, we have 1,382 more days of the Trump administration.
We're going to have plenty to talk about.
Subscribe to our podcast. Tell your friends, too. If you're enjoying this, tell your friends about this podcast. It doesn't take much of their time, 15, 20 minutes a week or thereabouts, and we give out good information, I think. At least we don't spread misinformation. If we happen to slip up, we correct ourselves, right?
Unlike the administration, but yes.
So leave us a good review on iTunes. You can get us on Spotify, on YouTube. We're on all the platforms. We appreciate you for listening, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.